We also included this fancy ass leather strap that comes with his branding but is made by Q Straps if I'm not mistaken, which is a Portuguese brand. There's also a hard shell case that comes included with the guitar, and it's a pretty cool quality case, not too big either, which is a super cool detail. And honestly, other than the time for research and development, not only on Rui's side, but my side as well, to figure out and make sure of some of the specs, so I wanted to do a bunch of research to make sure that everything turned out fine.
Hello there. So the video got corrupted in this section, only for technology to fail at important bits, but what I was trying to say is that it doesn't really take Rui long to make the guitar, because even though we took almost 2 years to make sure that we got all the details right, and at one point I delayed the project, I gave Rui my initial ideas and he started working on it, and I ended up having to spend some money in extra pieces of gear for other professional reasons. And while I was still very much interested in the guitar, I didn't really want Rui to keep working on it and doing the whole R&D process, and even work on any prototypes while I was still in a position where I couldn't afford the guitar for a year basically. But after that whole thing was settled and we finalized all the prototypes, drawings, and I even went to his workshop to pick out the woods, choose the exact color out of the catalogs, and some other details. All of that was finished by the end of June of 2024, but I caught Rui at a time where he was building a bunch of other guitars, so he was kind of busy and didn't really start building it until the beginning to mid-July. But by the beginning of September, the guitar was already built, and he'll even send videos and photos of the building process. I'll try to put some of those in as I'm doing this portion with a post-recorded audio. If you've watched some of my other videos, I ended up only picking it up by the end of September, beginning of October, because of a family trip I went on. But yeah, if you think about it, while mine had a bunch of things we had to figure out, which totally depends on the type of custom build, the type of guitar you're looking for. Maybe your custom build is something that's more straightforward, which doesn't really mean it's any bit worse. But yeah, it just might mean that it doesn't take as much time to do the R&D and the type of building process, and however difficult it actually is, and also how much work Rui has on his hands on other guitars that he's building, also appearances in trade shows and stuff like that. And I swear that I'm being honest with these dates. When it came to the actual building phase, we're talking July, August, and I guess a couple of days or a week or two, maybe tops, in September, if I'm not mistaken, but again, don't quote me on that. His website usually gives you an approximate 4-month period until you receive the guitar, but as you can see through my example, it might be less than that. And we're talking about a summertime build, which often includes people being on vacation and musicians being on tour, which might mean extra repairs for Rui to work on. But even then, we're talking about a super fast turnout time, and there were no loose parts or screws in this guitar. Everything was looked after and thought through. There's not even a single thing that I can complain about the build or quality of the guitar, other than I guess this one situation when it came to the nut. But it wasn't even technically Rui's fault, because it's something that he wouldn't really test out unless he was kind of crazy in the first place. Because if you notice, on top of the headstock there's no string trees on this guitar, and I kinda insisted on having the reverse headstock with no tilt back angle and no string trees as well, because like I mentioned before, I got all my fixed bridge fake whammy bar tricks on my telly, and so I'm used to doing things like bending the strings behind the nut and doing these very extreme bends on the low 6th string that most people would probably never do when they're playing around. And while I was test driving the guitar when I got it back at Rui's workshop, I didn't do none of those extreme bends, just because I guess I was not really inspired to do them as I was to try out some of these new chordal things that I've been working on. But a couple of days later, when I was just jamming around, if I did some of those extreme bends only on the 7th string, the string would pop itself out of the nut slot, which required Rui to cut a new nut for it, which he also didn't charge me for. And as I mentioned before, per Rui's suggestion, we are already doing staggered locking tuners, but even then, a string tree would probably be useful in the lowest 2 to 3 strings. But when I asked him hey listen, do you think we can work around it if we just make the nuts slightly taller? He guessed through his math and experience that it would work, and it did, because he then did a new nut that is slightly taller, and I can now do all the extreme bends I want, and the string doesn't pop itself out of the nut slot anymore, and there's pretty much no unwanted ringing on those strings. But again, I can't really fault Rui for that, because this is kind of one of those things where if I just went according to Rui's plan and experience, everything would have turned out fine. But since I insisted on trying different things, he kinda had to rework the situation to fit my needs. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that only an experienced luthier can do that great of a job. And if we're being honest, there were even some times where Rui would tell me oh, I'm doing this, and I would tell him hey listen, I'm not the builder, but you don't really have to worry about that. It's fine if it's a little Brad Baker style. And he would just immediately reply with something oh, absolutely not. I would never have something in my workshop leave like that. I think I've mentioned everything I wanted to mention, so let's hear another playing sample and let's go back to the video.
Thank you for watching this video. This is just a section of the bigger video of the review/demo of my custom Rui Silva guitar. If you'd like to learn more about it, please click the full video and consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, follow, and stay tuned for more.